What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the shelf and happy October. It is finally spooky season, and with that comes spooky movies. So I have for you today a list of 13 movies that I have curated that I find to be very fun to watch around this time of year. When curating this list, I really wanted to try to emphasize movies that, aren't exactly incredibly obscure or anything like that, but they also might not be the first movies that you think of when it comes time to watch a Halloween horror film. So you're not going to see John Carpenter's, 1978 Halloween on here. You're not going to see Trick or Treat, any of those. We all know about those. I thought it would be more fun to talk about some movies that, perhaps don't get brought up as much in the conversation during the month of October. All right, first up, we got The Changeling. This is a 1980 film starring George C. Scott, and this is what I would describe as a very classy sort of ghost story. It's a bit on the slower side. It's even light on scares, but what it does do very well is it plays with the psychological and, the sort of more human things that people can do to each other that are just downright awful and horrifying. And, this movie kind of slowly peels that stuff back and, until there's nothing left, and then you're sort of forced to reckon with what you're seeing. And, it is very slow and it's more psychological, like I was saying, but, it does have some more iconic scenes. Specifically, you might have seen parodied in like the Scary Movie series where, there's the ball kind of falling down the steps and stuff like that. So it's a very influential movie, but perhaps one that people don't actually know where those influences come from, and they come back to The Changeling. It's a very psychological movie, but it's very effective. It's very good, and I really recommend it. All right, next up, we got to get some Italian horror representation on here, and I went with Inferno. A lot of people talk about Suspiria, very good film. I really enjoy Inferno. It's a movie that I had to watch a few times to really start to grow an appreciation for. It's kind of incoherent in terms of plot, but that's kind of what I love about it. It almost sort of changes protagonists like several times throughout the film, and it's like almost like an anthology in that sense where, you're following a character and then something happens to them and then now you're following this character. And I don't know, I just love the aesthetic of this film. There's a scene in this film early on where there's this girl and she's like underwater and she's like in a room, but it's underwater. It's like unlike anything I've ever seen before. And like that image has lived rent free in my mind ever since the first time I saw this film. So yeah, Dario Argento's Inferno. I believe this is like technically the second film in a sequel or a trilogy, of films where it's like Suspiria, this, and the Stendhal Syndrome. I forget what the whole idea is, but I believe it's like the Three Mothers trilogy is what it's referred to as. I haven't seen the third film in the trilogy, but it's a really great movie, and you definitely don't need to have seen Suspiria or that other film in order to enjoy Inferno. So definitely check out Inferno this Halloween season if you're looking to watch some more foreign films, and there's no better place to start than with some Italian horror. All right, next up we have The Haunting. This is an interesting one. This is a film that I watched a lot when I was a kid. Definitely one of my introductions to the horror genre. It's not terribly scary, and nostalgia might be doing a lot of the heavy lifting here for me with this one. But this one's just a fun time. You've got sort of a wild cast. It's like Lily Taylor from the Conjuring films, Owen Wilson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Liam Neeson, of all people. So it's kind of a melting pot of a cast, but somehow it works. This film's from 1999, so it's a little dated, it's a little cheesy. Some of the CGI effects haven't aged terribly well, but the house that this film is set in is really atmospheric and does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of, providing something to really sink your teeth into visually. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. It's also a remake, obviously, of another film that I have right here, also called The Haunting. I forget when this one's from. 1963. This film is good too. I think I prefer The Haunting from 99. I don't know, call me crazy. But yeah, this one is a cool one that you can just kind of put on, if you happen to be browsing on your phone, on social media while this one's on. You're not really going to miss terribly much. So it's a fun one to just kind of, I would consider it a low investment, low stakes kind of horror film. You know, it's just one to just kind of have some fun and turn your brain off and eat some popcorn. All right, next up is The Others from 2001, I believe. This one's starring Nicole Kidman. And I really love this film because it is like such an atmospheric ghost story, and the 4K disc from Criterion is really great. It's got a lot of features, interviews with the director. You know, I consider the 2000s to be like probably my personal least favorite decade for horror. There's certainly many gems, but like for the most part, I find that 2000s aesthetic can really drag down a lot of, you know, films from that decade. But, you know, The Others does not have that problem because it is a period piece. So, you know, it's very well crafted. And if you showed this to someone today and told them it was from 2025 and they'd never seen it before, they would probably believe you, you know, aside from Nicole Kidman being 24 years younger. You know, regardless of that, you know, that's how well this movie has aged, and it certainly holds up very well. It's got a really cool twist. If you don't know the twist, do not look it up beforehand. Just go in blind and check out The Others. It is a really great atmospheric ghost story for the spooky season. All right, moving right along here, we got House on Haunted Hill. I believe this one's also from 99. Yeah, also from 99. Same as The Haunting. Look, this one is very cheesy. It's very campy. It's very dated. It's also a remake of a William Castle film. But this movie also, despite being kind of silly and goofy and dated, has some genuinely really creepy moments. You know, a lot of the stuff that happens in the basement of the house on Haunted Hill is legitimately creepy. There's this one scene where this girl is like recording on I think it's like a camcorder or something, and she's seeing these ghosts through the viewfinder, but they're not actually there. And just that sort of, you know, cinematic language, I guess, is very interesting and very creepy and very effective. And yeah, I think this one's definitely a nostalgia pick for me. I watched this a lot growing up as well. But I do think it's a fun one. Again, similar to The Haunting, you can kind of just put this on, turn your brain off, and just have fun with it. So I would definitely recommend House on Haunted Hill. Let me know what you guys think about this one. Am I crazy? I tried to think of movies that, you know, aren't hailed as masterpieces or anything, because we all know that they're masterpieces, right? But maybe you're just looking for something a little more low effort, a little more low investment rate, where, you know, you don't have to necessarily be fully locked in. You know, this is a movie that you can just kind of put on and have fun with. And those are genuinely some of my favorite movies to watch around this time of year, because I just like to have fun with horror films, and I don't want to necessarily go through The Exorcist, you know, every night. So this is definitely more on the fun side, and I definitely would recommend it. All right, next up, we got my favorite Hammer horror film, Taste the Blood of Dracula. This is from Warner Brothers, really cool Blu-ray release. Pretty bare bones, but, you know, just having a film like this, you know, on Blu-ray, very cool. Hopefully, you know, maybe they'll do a 4K, because I really do think that this is one of the better Hammer horror films out there. You know, it follows this group of these wealthy men, and they sort of are finding themselves at a loss for ways to, like, you know, enjoy themselves, right? They've got money, they've got women, they've got, you know, anything they could possibly want. So, you know, after that happens, you know, they kind of have this realization that the only thing left for them is to kind of get into like the occult and, you know, sort of everlasting life. So they get seduced by this guy who is sort of a thrall or a pawn of Dracula, played by Christopher Lee here, of course. And, you know, these guys are sort of on a collision course with him, and, you know, they kind of realize that they're, you know, perhaps biting off more than they can chew. And, you know, one of the men has a daughter, and she gets kind of swept up in all of it. And it's a really great, surprisingly very watchable film. It's very entertaining. I personally have found that some of these Hammer horror films just simply don't have enough going on to hold my, you know, millennial attention span, I guess. For lack of a better word. I'm not afraid to say it. Some of these old movies from the 50s and 60s, they're boring. Some of them are just boring. And, you know, as try as I might to try to get into them, sometimes I just can't. But not the case with this movie. I really was able to sink my teeth into this one, no pun intended, and really enjoyed it a lot. So if you haven't seen Taste the Blood of Dracula, but you like Hammer horror films, what the hell are you doing? Go out and get this one from Warner Brothers. All right, next up on my list, we have what I consider to be Tim Burton's best film by far, and that is the 4K disc of Sleepy Hollow. This is the 4K from Paramount that came out a couple years back. Doesn't have a ton of features, but the 4K transfer is very good. And to me, this is just Tim Burton at his absolute best. You know, a lot of people will point at Beetlejuice, maybe the Batman films. To me, this is by far his most atmospheric, most, you know, just beautiful, all around beautiful movie to watch. I really love all the performances. There's like a lot of Hammer horror legends in here as well. Christopher Lee makes a cameo, as well as some other gentlemen as well. So everyone is just really great here. You know, Johnny Depp, very solid as always. And this one's probably one of the more, I guess you'd say, mainstream picks of mine, but I just happen to really love this movie so much that I couldn't help but put it on here because, again, like I said, a lot of people will go to things like Beetlejuice when it comes to Tim Burton for Halloween time. To me, you really can't do any better than Sleepy Hollow, so would definitely recommend you check out this movie around Halloween time. All right, next up, this one might get me in a little bit of trouble with some of you guys, but just hear me out, okay? We got Skinamarink. This film is from director Kyle Edward Ball, and one of the things that I really find so appealing about this film is just the sort of DIY nature of it. You know, he made this movie like by himself in his parents' childhood home. Not by himself, he had a crew obviously, but very small crew, low budget, and, you know, regardless of whether or not you enjoyed it, you cannot tell me that this is not something very, very unique, very experimental, and just overall nightmarish. I mean, you know, for me personally, for my money, I really found it to be very effective. I found it to be very creepy, and I'm really looking forward to watching it again because I've only seen it the one time. But this is something that I'm really looking forward to watching again for a second time with all the lights off, phone in the other room, and just kind of immerse myself in this childhood nightmare. It's really unlike anything I've ever seen before, and, you know, maybe it's a little too long, maybe it's too boring, you know, whatever complaints you can levy at this, you know, I'm not saying that they're invalid or anything, but I do really, you know, I would push back against anyone who tells me that this movie has nothing to offer, because I just think that couldn't be further from the truth. So, you know, maybe give Skinamarink another shot. If you watched it once and hated it, watch it again, see how you feel. You know, like I said, put your phone in the other room, turn the lights out. I'm sure that's how Kyle Edward Ball would have liked you to watch it. So that's how I'm going to watch it too. This Blu-ray disc from RLJE also has some interviews with the director himself, as well as the director of photography. So if you want a little bit more insights into how these guys made this movie, this is a good Blu-ray to own for that. I think there's also a steelbook as well out there, but I believe it's just the same disc. So, all right, moving right along. This one also might catch some flack from me, simply because of the way that I feel about this film. And this is Malignant. James Wan, in my opinion, this is his best movie. It's not Saw, it's not Insidious, and it's not The Conjuring. To me, Malignant is James Wan's best film. Hear me out. Don't go disliking the video or unsubscribing or anything. I just really admire the ballsiness of this movie. It is so unhinged. It's so crazy. In no way would I assume that this is not the movie that James Wan wanted to make. You know, there was nobody in his ear telling him, maybe you shouldn't do that. You know, no, he did it, and he did it all. He did everything he wanted to do with this. And, you know, by this point, he had so much goodwill built up for the Aquaman movies that he made, and I think also Fast and Furious. So Warner Brothers was just like, all right, you did your one for us, or your two for us, whatever many, now you can do one for you, and this is what he did. He did fucking Malignant, and it is awesome. I love this movie so much. It is so batshit insane, as well as featuring some legitimately incredible cinematography and some visuals that I really think are just awesome and, you know, still hold up to me, you know, all these years later. All these years. It's only been like 3 or 4 years, but regardless, really enjoyed Malignant. Let me know down in the comments. What do you think? Am I crazy for thinking this is his best movie? Probably. I think some of you will probably push back on that, but I'm standing 10 toes down on this one. If that didn't get me in trouble, this one definitely will. You know, I said that we wouldn't have John Carpenter's Halloween on this list, but we do have a Halloween movie on this list, and it is Halloween Ends. Now, I was like, presumably, a lot of you, when this movie came out, And I was confused by it. I was annoyed by it. I did not like it. I thought they dropped the ball. You know, they fumbled the third act. They did not land the plane successfully. You know, whatever complaint you want to levy at this. And honestly, many of them I will agree with. I will agree with them, because doing what they did in this movie, in the final movie of their trilogy, it doesn't make sense. It was a weird decision, but you know, listen, these movies were out of juice story-wise by the second movie, and this is the 13th movie. So like, honestly, what I've grown to really value in the Halloween films over the years at this point in my life is originality, is taking swings, even if they don't necessarily work in every way, and just doing something weird. You know, that's why I've kind of grown to really enjoy Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. I think that's a pretty solid movie. And, you know, I would kind of put this in the same ballpark where, listen, if you want classic Halloween, you've got that. Even H18 is doing that. It's giving you that. But if you want something a little weirder, a little more interesting with some actual, you know, ideas, whether or not you think the ideas are good, this one has them, and they had the balls to execute them. And, you know, I really do think this movie is going to get a big reappraisal 5-10 years from now, and people's tune on this one is going to change, I think. And I'm not trying to say that I'm some sort of trendsetter. Like I said, I didn't like this at first, but I found myself drawn back to it as years would go by, and I would rewatch it, and I'd be like, this is all right. And I liked it more and more with each watch, and you know, it's definitely in my top half of my Halloween ranking now. And yeah, like I said, I just admire when the Halloween movies do something different, because so many of them are just very derivative, and they're just doing the same thing. You know, that's maybe perhaps a gross oversimplification, but for the most part, none of the Halloween movies are taking swings like Halloween Ends does. And, you know, that in and of itself is something to be praised, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to rewatching Halloween Ends this October. Let me know what you guys think. I'm prepared for the pushback. I know this isn't one that's necessarily beloved, but damn it, I like it. So here we are. All right, next up is George Romero's Day of the Dead. While this one is not my favorite of the original Dead trilogy, you know, with Night, Dawn, and Day, Night is definitely my favorite. I would definitely say this is my second favorite, and with Dawn at the end. Maybe that's a hot take, I'm not sure, but, you know, here we are. I just really like what Day of the Dead is doing. I think it has, again, a lot of interesting ideas. That's something that I tend to value in a horror film. Some of the best zombie effects and gore that you'll ever see. I think he really got it down with this one, Romero. You know, the zombies in Night are just kind of like people with some makeup on. The zombies in Dawn just look kind of bluish green. You know, they hadn't quite figured out the makeup, but then with Day, they nailed it. And we're fully in the thick of the 80s by this point. So practical effects are as good as they'll ever be, probably. And, you know, it is very much highlighted in Day of the Dead. Shout out Tom Savini. He killed it yet again, as he always does. Is it Bob or is it Bub, the zombie? Whichever one it is. He's amazing. He really is the heart of this movie, oddly enough. You know, he's, as a non-human character, he's like doing the most emotional heavy lifting in terms of like story beats and like human emotion that it's able to draw out of you. Yeah, this movie is just fantastic, but I probably don't need to tell you that. This one's a little bit more, again, on like the mainstream side of like, you know, movies that people are very likely to go to. You know, they probably will watch Night of the Living Dead first before this, as far as Halloween time goes, but I'm sure Day of the Dead is up there for a lot of you as well. So you don't need me to tell you how great this is, or maybe you do. Maybe you haven't seen this. And if that's the case, go watch it for the spooky season. All right, we only got 2 more left now. This one is one of my all-time favorite horror films. I think it's, you know, perhaps not underrated, because a lot of people do give it its flowers, but somehow I still feel like this one doesn't get the attention that it deserves for just how clever and, you know, innovative it is. And that's Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. I have the collector's edition from Scream Factory here. loaded with special features, pretty much anything you could possibly want on this one. Maybe we'll get a 4K one of these days, but if not, you're more than satisfied. You should be more than satisfied with this Blu-ray. And I just love how clever this movie is. You know, it feels like it's an impossible task these days to sort of deliver an iteration of the slasher film that somehow manages to turn it on its head in a clever way. We just got one recently with In a Violent Nature, which, you know, so that's proof positive right there that there's still ways that you can kind of innovate on the slasher genre. And, you know, this film does that as well, and to really great effect. I mean, I think it's Nathan Basil is how you pronounce his name. He's fantastic in this movie. He's funny, he's creepy, and just the writing of this film is so clever. Like the way that they're able to break down and explain, like, not only the psychology of the final girl and like how that all comes to be, but like just the way that all the prep that like the slasher villain has to do ahead of time before the movie starts in order to kind of craft a scenario that is going to go the way that he wants it to go, and he plans for every possible outcome. It's just so smart. It's very funny, and I just really love it. It's a love letter to slasher films. If for some reason you have not seen Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon and you like slasher movies, turn this video off and go watch it, because it is very, very good. Definitely one of my favorite slasher films of all time. All right, last but not least, we got another one that's definitely not a deep cut or niche at all, but I had to include it because I can't have October come and go without at least having watched this film one time. And that is Fright Night. Let me see if I can catch the light here. I got the 4K Steelbook right here from Sony. Really beautiful Steelbook. I love that it just doesn't even have the title. It just has that iconic poster, and that's it. And it's like, you already know what the deal is with this one. This thing is loaded with special features. If I'm not mistaken, it even includes the You're So Cool, Brewster documentary making of film, which is like a feature-length documentary in and of itself. So that's really cool. You really will not be wanting for features with this 4K release here. Picture quality is great, obviously. But as far as the film itself goes, Fright Night is just a masterpiece. It's my favorite vampire film of all time. I really love the way that it sort of combines the Dracula Hammer horror era, but it does so through the vehicle or the medium of an 80s horror film. So you're sort of getting like those 50s, 60s sensibilities combined with that of the 80s, and it's just such a perfect pairing. It's like peanut butter and jelly. I think it just works so, so well. And, you know, Chris Sarandon as Jerry Dandridge is fantastic. He's just aura farming the whole movie. You know, everyone is just great in this movie. Evil Ed is iconic. Oh, and how could I forget Roddy McDowall as Peter Vincent? So, so good. Everyone's just great in this film. So, yeah, this is definitely one that I would really encourage you to see. If for some reason you have not seen it, it's fantastic. And that's it, guys. Those are my 13 horror recommendations for the month of October. These are not necessarily movies that take place around Halloween, but they sort of channel the spirit of Halloween in a roundabout sort of way where, you know, a lot of them are just classic sort of ghost stories, slashers, creature features that, you know, are very atmospheric and, you know, just are a good time. They're a good time. You can just kind of put them on and enjoy yourself. And yeah, I think that's honestly what Halloween is all about. So, all right, guys. So with that being said, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, and horror in general. What are some of your favorite horror films to watch in the month of October? Let me know down in the comments. I'm very curious to hear them. And with that, guys, please take care and watch more movies.